Hey there, it's Simon Mannering from WeFirst, and welcome to our first YouTube Live. Hope everyone is well. And the focus today is how to bring your company purpose to life through digital storytelling. I think all of us are wrestling as marketers to get our arms around all the different channels and media which we can leverage to bring our brand story to life, but even more particularly our purpose today. And if you had to put a note on it or a button on it, every single one of us as marketers are struggling to engage with these consumers who are media savvy, who are always on, who are hyper connected, and so literate in media themselves that if you're not relating to them in a way that you feel is authentic and compelling and relevant to their lives, they simply won't pay attention, let alone buy your products or promote your brand. And this digital landscape is so different now than it was even when I started in marketing 20 years ago. I remember sitting back in the days when I was working at Wieden & Kennedy on Nike up in Portland, and we're sitting there going, we hear about this thing called the internet and that people are going to buy things on the web. That's never going to work. Well, here we are, and we find ourselves with Uber, the world's largest taxi service, and they in fact don't own any vehicles. And we've got Facebook, which is the world's largest media owner, and they actually don't create any content. And you've got Alibaba, which is the world's most valuable retailer, and yet they have absolutely no inventory. And then finally, Airbnb, which is the largest accommodation provider in the world, and they don't own any real estate. I mean, that's how digitized, how virtual, how ephemeral our marketing landscape has become. So what do we do? Well, firstly, we need to recognize exactly where our customers are beginning their purchasing journey. And if you look at the latest criteria report, 65% of customers begin their purchasing journey actually on their smartphone. And you probably see that, particularly with younger demographics like millennials and Gen Z. They're completely fixated with their phones, their eyes locked on the screens. That's where they're doing the majority of their purchasing, and that's where their purchasing decision or journeys begin. 25% start on their PC or laptop, and then 11% start on a tablet. So that gives you a sense of not only the relative mix of where people begin their purposing journey, but then where they migrate to. For example, those that start on a smartphone, the majority migrate to a PC or laptop. Those that start on a laptop, 20% of them migrate to their mobile phone, and so on. So, they're very media savvy. They take different paths in their purchasing journey. But if there's one defining quality as to that new digital landscape, that storytelling landscape, it's that we live in this on-demand world, this world of Amazon Prime, this world of Instacart, where whether it's dinner or anything you want to order or anything you need in the moment, it's delivered to you where you are when you want it. And that is being facilitated by a wide range of new technologies, most notably wearables, whether it's, a wristband like the iWatch or something, which allows you to do things that were never even possible before, or whether it's VR goggles that give you these immersive experiences. So at every touch point with the consumer, whether it's what you're saying, how you're saying, how you're saying it, and how they're interacting with you, everything's being disrupted. And so that's really transforming not only purposeful storytelling, but the digital landscape outright. And so with all that as context, I'd want to share that if you really want to move purposeful storytelling on the digital landscape in an effective way, you've got to move it beyond advertising. And what do I mean by that? Well, typically advertising backs out of media channels. Having spent 25 years working in advertising in Australia, London, and all over the US, invariably you'd buy your media well in advance to get the most cost-effective, media buy, and then you'd sort of back into those channels and those air dates and so on. Now we live in this real-time on-demand world. And so we need to think about how we engage consumers differently, particularly across these digital platforms. And one powerful way to do so, and I'm going to give a number of different recommendations and tactics, one powerful way to do so is to not think in terms of advertising or marketing, but how do you lead an industry movement? How do you establish your leadership within the industry by leading a movement on behalf of the industry? And so when it comes to purpose, let me give you a specific example. There was the great tragedy in Bangladesh where the factories collapsed and, tragically lives were lost, and many, many women who made the clothing that so many of us take for granted, these fashion label brands, their lives were sadly lost. And as a response, the industry at large needed to become accountable for how they were treating those who really make the supply chain possible in the first place. And so there was this campaign that was led by a number of brands within the industry called I Made Your Clothes. And it actually showed the people making your clothes behind the scenes. They actually showed people, portraits of the people who were making your clothes, holding up a sign saying, I made your clothes. And what this really did was it humanized the industry. It spoke on behalf of the industry. It engaged people because it humanized these brands, not just outright, but even more so in the context of this great tragedy. Secondly, another way to really kind of leverage digital platforms to bring your purpose to life is all these immersive storytelling tools. Many brands out there have tried VR films of late, and you see Tom's, you see Charity Water. All what they're doing is they're giving you a human experience in contribution. So with Tom's, they allowed you to actually go on a virtual giving trip. So if you actually went and bought a pair of Tom's shoes in at Macy's, you could actually put on some VR goggles and you'd see a trip and you'd see the shoes being donated. If on the non-profit side you looked at Charity Water, you could look at their VR film and you could be there in and amongst the members of a village where a well was being dug at the moment that water was found, and you could actually experience palpably in a very human level what it was like to actually transform your life because there was suddenly this water table available underneath the ground that was suddenly accessed. So, you've got to leverage these immersive storytelling tools. So build movements, leverage immersive storytelling tools, and thirdly, think outside the typical media channels. My experience of the marketing world right now is that it's so many people shouting. It's almost all noise and very little signal, and we all feel to some degree compelled to do it. Yet at the same time, privately, we all scratch our heads saying, is it making any difference? Is anybody noticing or listening? Or are we just looking at our own metrics to see if anybody's looking or listening to us? And also there's the perennial discussion about bots and how many of those metrics are legitimate or not and all those issues. And so in that context, one very powerful strategy to take is to create long format content. So, you see Illy Espresso, the coffee company, doing a very powerful film about women's empowerment that went around the film festivals around the world. Or you see Patagonia, the footwear and apparel maker, doing their film Damnation, which was all about restoring these major watercourses in the US to help support the fish life there and all the ecosystem that depends on it. And so you're seeing these very purposeful brands thinking outside the traditional limits of advertising and channels and media buys and saying, how do we get our story across in the most compelling ways, and creating films. And now you're seeing, films like Werner Herzog, his film Lo and Behold, which was done on behalf of a technology company that was featured at the Sundance Film Festival and ultimately sold. And so suddenly you can create a film to tell your brand story, but it's created as legitimately compelling content that then gets sold and you recoup your costs and it builds your brand awareness out there in the world. All because you started to think about how to tell your purpose across digital formats in unusual ways, in this case through long form content. And so if you have those broader three strategies in mind, how do you link purposeful storytelling in a more granular way to your storefront, to your point of sale? And I wanted to share a number of different tactics to that end. One tactic is to really show people the contribution they're making by buying your product on the strength of how responsible your supply chain is by creating an app. So, for example, Nike made the Making of the Making app, which allowed you to see the supply chain and all the factors that went into ensuring that the product you're buying is responsible, and therefore, by doing so, the positive contribution you're making by supporting an apparel maker like that. So the Making of the Making app. Another thing you can do is really make sure that you celebrate the customer's moment. Cliff Bar has done a wonderful campaign called Meet the Moment. And what they did was they asked people to go out into the world and to document and capture those moments of experience they're having out in the world, out in the environment, having a moment of, experience of adventure, and to share what that meant to them on a personal level, on a human level, what being so immersed in the natural world meant to them, that all spoke to what the brand stands for. And you could upload your photograph, your video, you could literally add your moment to Cliff Bar's Meet the Moment campaign, and you got this incredible visual library of not just what the brand stands for, but more importantly, what its customers are doing and how they're bringing the brand's values and ultimately their product, which they're taking with them, to life in their lives. And it's, I think you could talk about REI's Opt Outside in a very similar way. Opt Outside originally was a commitment to the employees at REI where they said, you know what, rather than kind of do what everybody else does on Black Friday and have a very sort of dense commercial day, let's give our employees a break and send them out into the world and opt outside and really give everyone, double down on their values effectively. And so they did that, and it took on a life of its own where not only did the whole company do that, but other companies, 100 companies in the first year. This year was more like 400 companies, in 2016, 2015 being the first year. And it became this movement in its own right. But it was all about the purpose of the brand. It was all about doubling down on its values, in that case in the service of their employees, and that taking on a life of its own as across all their digital platforms, from Instagram to Facebook to their website, you could upload your moment of opting outside, whether you're paddling in a canoe, climbing a cliff, taking a nature walk, and they had tens of thousands of these submissions, which were not only a celebration of the world, the psychological landscape of the brand, but a true counterpoint to Black Friday. And so their digital landscapes effectively became co-owned and co-created by their customers, which is such a powerful proposition. And then the brand itself would amplify those pieces of content, and it was a gift that kept on giving. Another strategy is to really embrace new technologies in surprising ways. Now, I already mentioned leveraging sort of immersive storytelling, but companies like Lockheed Martin, which are all about speaking to the future and all the integrity of the engineering that they bring to all the different industries they play in. When they wanted to speak to the future, they committed to education, and what they did was they created a VR bus. So in the service of education, they created a bus and they go around to different schools, and the kids would come out of the schools, get on the bus. All the windows were in fact screens, and they would take the kids for a drive in this VR bus, and all the screens would simultaneously play what it looked like to be in that moment on Mars. And the reactions of the kids on the strength of such an immersive experience was extraordinary. They'd be like, oh my God, there they are on Mars, and they see the rover, spacecraft, and they see all these things going on. And because the bus was moving, and because they had this 360 immersive experience, it was absolutely compelling for them. It'll probably be a transformative experience for 2 or 3 kids in that bus who will commit themselves to life down that, journey down that sort of line in engineering and science. But they not only looked at a new technology like VR, but they brought it to life in a very compelling way, the bus that went around to schools in the context of their purpose, which is very much aligned around education. And then make sure that when you do engage with consumers that you reward them for doing so. H&M is one of the sort of leading apparel brands that are really leading the way in terms of sustainability. And one of the ways that they've done that is they've led a very comprehensive recycling program where they not only encourage you to buy their responsibly sourced and manufactured product, they encourage you to recycle it, to return it to the store. And when you do, you can use the H&M Conscious app to enter what you returned at your store, and then to get a credit. You're given a store credit, a coupon for 15% off your next item that you purchase. So there it is. There's a digital tool which incentivizes you to contribute to the brand's purpose in alignment with the values that you share by returning the product they made, and you're rewarded for doing so. So, their app is a very powerful demonstration of how to really incentivize people to work towards common goals like that. And then finally, I'd like to share the example of Everlane, which is, a young and growing fashion brand that really turns on the platform of radical transparency, because they're really founded on the idea that there's too much markup, too many middlemen in the fashion industry. So let's cut all those out and deliver high quality products at a much more cost-effective, price point for everybody. And there they were thinking about moving into Canada. And, they didn't necessarily have the resources to move in there in their own right. And so they wanted to test the waters. They wanted to see, is there really an appetite for the Everlane brand in Canada? So they did a crowdfunding campaign, Crowdfund Canada, where they set a goal of reaching $100,000 in contribution as a demonstration as to whether people in Canada wanted the Everlane brand to be there, wanted to market their products there. And they reached that goal. And what was so compelling about it was that it's very counterintuitive, but was a powerful use of all their digital platforms, which was to say, do you want us? And if so, demonstrate it. potential customers, and do it through crowdsourcing and make a contribution that will allow us to come to your marketplace. And so on the strength of that, they not only got confirmation that they should go to Canada, but they did it in a way that they already had pre-qualified all these potential customers who'd put their hand up and said, we want to contribute to you coming to Canada. So they did several jobs all at once, most importantly of which was leveraging their digital platforms around their purpose in really, really compelling ways. And so if I had to sort of summarize those three strategies and then these different tactics about how to bring your purpose to life across digital channels, one is, rather than talking about marketing from an outbound where the brand, you're the customer sense, think about it in terms of scaling intimacy. Think about how can you establish a one-to-one emotional relationship with one of your customers, and then how do you scale that in a way that will maintain loyalty? Why? Because they're engaged. Why? Because they feel like they're contributing to the success of the brand, to the elevation of its values, to the impact it has on the world. Secondly, commit to shared storytelling. At every turn, think about how you can offload the content creation and cost burden by really working with your customers on the strength of your shared values and purpose to tell the story of your brand. So whether they appear in the advertising, whether they curate the content, whether they suggest ideas, whatever it might be, think about how you can do it together, because that's half the battle won. You've already got engagement and you've already built in the idea that they're going to share that content. Why? Because it features them. And then when you amplify what they're participating in, you get sort of two bites of the same apple. And then thirdly, contribute meaningfully. Make sure that whatever you do through your company or your products, you should have a measurable impact. And what many brands fail to do is they have a positive impact, and there's so much deal flow going in terms of content, and they're in such a rush to get to the next thing that once they've had an impact, they say that's great and they move on. And what they fail to do is reflect back to the audience, to reflect back to the community that actually made that impact possible, the difference they made, the brand's gratitude for their participation. And so really never overlook that last mile in what we at WeFirst call the story supply chain. That last mile. It's not when you have your impact as a function of your purpose. It's once you've had your impact, tell that story back to everyone who made it possible. So scale intimacy, commit to shared storytelling, and really contribute meaningfully. And if you do those things across your digital channels, you'll suddenly find that your purpose can come to life in really surprising, creative, engaging ways. So you'll cut through all the noise and the clutter that's out there. And also, you'll actually do it in a very cost-effective way because you'll be doing it with your community, which means you'll be able to reach far more people, far more cost-effectively, because everyone, all stakeholders within the brand community are involved. So I hope these strategies and tactics are useful, and we look forward to the next YouTube Live.